When we developed He-Man, I had no idea that it was going to be what it turned out to be. I mean, you can't plan hits. I mean, that's the wonderful part of showbiz. I mean, if they're worthwhile, they'll work somehow. I just knew it was a way to keep a lot of people working for at least a year. And when the thing went on, and when we saw the letters that started coming in, it was extraordinary. I mean, it was just really a phenomenon. It was probably the first show that was that successful in the history of animation.
From 1965 to 1988, American animation studio Filmation developed and created dozens of popular television series and several feature films. Many of them featured larger-than-life licensed heroes, such as Superman, Batman, Captain Marvel, Tarzan, Zorro, or the cast of Star Trek. But one hero would rule the airwaves and carve out a place in television history. Join us now to explore the secret origins of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. In the wake of the success of science fiction films such as the Star Wars and various superhero films and television series, the sword and sorcery milieu was about to be invigorated.
I guess Tom Kalinske called me. He was president of Mattel at the time. And he said they had this character called He-Man. He said, would you be interested? I assumed it was going to be for Saturday morning because it was the only way you could get something done was go to the network, try to sell a show. If they bought the show, they usually paid you almost enough to do the show. And then the foreign sales would make up the difference. And so I said, yeah, I'd like to do it. And I knew that we weren't going to be very busy. And I also knew that I was really getting to the place where it was so difficult to sell a network show and so unrewarding creatively that there had to be something else that would be done that could help the industry stay awake during those periods.
After approaching ABC, CBS, and NBC in early 1982 and being turned down, Scheimer hatched a plan to sell He-Man and the Masters of the Universe into syndication as a first-run syndicated show, airing an unprecedented 65 new episodes on weekdays.
He-Man not only was the first show that was produced 65 episodes in one season, it was also the first show to go in what was called first-run syndication. And this hadn't really been done before for cartoons, and it really created a new business, a whole new business model that frankly ended up evolving into the Nicks and the Disney channels and the Cartoon Networks that dominate children's television today. Prior to He-Man, there really wasn't original production that was made to be aired 5 days a week. It was only made for Saturday morning. So He-Man was breakthrough, not only in terms of its content, and not only in terms of the number of shows that were produced, but in terms of how those shows were broadcast.
65 allowed the stations to have 4 runs a year. And it was on a daily basis that they only had to show the show once every 3 months or something like that. And it was a number that allowed them to have a rotation in the shows that was not overwhelming.
He knew what reruns were and what they meant to the company, and no one had really pioneered making brand new syndicated shows, which were in essence brand new reruns. You know, I mean, obviously everything's planned to make money in reruns, but Lou planned to create a new dynasty for Filmation, and he stuck out his territory in working with the smaller networks, the small independent stations all across the country.
To sell the series to the independently owned television syndication market, Lou and Westinghouse executives went to a convention called NATPE, the National Association for Television Production Executives, in July 1982. They brought with them development materials from the show and ran into the man who was the star of the just-released feature film, Conan the Barbarian.
We had all of our drawings, we had some storyboards there. And it was interesting, people came up and they saw these drawings, they liked this characters, and we talked about the fact that we're going to do them with pro-social values built into the show. And I look up at one guy, and he was looking at some of the drawings. I said, that's Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah. It was funny.
And he was looking at these drawings and, and he was, you could tell he was ticked off.
Little did we know he'd be our governor.
Yeah, that's right. I wasn't calling him High Gov in those days.
I got involved with He-Man because there were 5 directors at that time. And Lou came to me, Lou Scheimer, and said that they had to have a really quick, like 3 minutes of full animation to present to a trade show to sell the series. So we were in the middle of production on our other shows at the time, so Lou said, "You're going to do this after hours." So I pulled in a couple Disney animators and had some of my own crew working after hours, and I literally stayed every night and it was just not even a complete scene, just a series of drawings going from my desk right to the assistants, just kind of keep the stuff rolling because we were really up against a really tight schedule. And we did it. They took it to the trade show and it sold the series.
While the series was being sold into syndication, work had already begun in earnest on the series itself. But even as the Filmation crew prepared the world of Eternia to be unveiled to kids everywhere, Lou Scheimer was faced with some real-world concerns in the form of protests.
This was coming off of the 70s, which was the most regulated era of children's television, where no violence was allowed, and this was all the result of Action for Children's Television, otherwise known as ACT. And what had happened in the 70s was all of violence and adventure and everything was basically just knocked out of children's television, and it became very pat, very puerile. There was no Johnny Quest, there was no superheroes really to speak of. I mean, it was basically the era of Scooby-Doo. And Scooby-Doo sort of came out of the fact that they couldn't do anything else with action.
That was one of the funniest things about this show is before it even got on the air, they were up in arms about how violent it was going to be. And I remember just being so frustrated because nobody had seen a frame of film.
He-Man was a real lightning rod in its time for the kinds of critics that paid no attention to the content of the show. Because I think if you saw the content of He-Man, you would be, I think there's not a lot to complain about in terms of violence and lessons and messages it's giving.
My Lasertron will stop you, He-Man. Let me give you a hand.
He-Man obviously was primarily an action show, but I think what differentiated it from others of its genre and why it has resonated for so long and so deeply is it was about family. It was about a family of characters that really cared about each other, and it had a moral tone. It had a lesson and a message that underlied all the action, and it also had comedy, and so you know, every episode had an action goal and a conflict that resulted in action, but there was always far more going on beneath the surface.
Arthur was very, very concerned always about story and character development and doing nothing that would harm our young audience, the children. He always wanted to make sure that everything was positive and pro-social values and nothing that children could imitate. He was always very concerned about that, very, very responsible. And in fact, we hired Don Roberts as a consultant to go over every story and make sure that there was nothing detrimental to children, everything had a pro-social value to it.
I got premises and scripts from writers, and my job was to say, is there a concept in here that can be highlighted, emphasized, reshaped to teach children some kind of a pro-social message, some kind of element of character, some kind of element of behavior, something that we want our kids to know. And so my task was saying, here's the characters, they're a given. Here's the world, that's a given. Now it's the story, and how can I work with the story to emphasize the kinds of things that I would hope kids would learn. The approach I wanted to take with that program was that whatever the lesson was about is what the show should be about.
Politics and the economic recession played a role in the development of He-Man, as the Federal Communications Commission made some major changes in policy.
The United States was going through everything to try to increase, to get out of the recession. We had oil problems in those days, worse than we had now. And of course, this was one way to help stimulate the economy. So they thought that if they relaxed the FCC rules, they would be able to generate more income from the private sector. Relaxing the FCC rules allowed manufacturers to make their own programming, again, which they hadn't done since the early 60s when they used to fully own a whole television show.
Even as Lou Scheimer was working out business deals and battling controversy, Arthur Nadell and Hal Sutherland were working with the writers and animators to explore the vast and varied world of Eternia.
Interestingly enough, there was some confusion about the phrase Masters of the Universe. And I don't think Mattel or Filmation ever really was completely clear on who was being referred to in that phrase, whether it was the villains, whether it was the good guys, or whether it was both together. And I suspect there was probably some sort of shift or revision on that thinking, because my first script referred to the villains as the Masters of the Universe, and subsequent scripts referred to the heroes. But in my personal mind, as I think of it this day, they're all the Masters of the Universe. There's the good Masters versus the evil Masters.
Together we defend Castle Grayskull from the evil Masters of the Universe.
I remember going down to Hawthorne, to the Mattel offices, with a group of writers and producers for the show to see the He-Man dolls for the very first time. And we were taken into a room there, and the whole product line was showed to us, along with a lot of development artwork. And it looked very interesting. It looked like Buck Rogers, like Flash Gordon, a little bit of Star Wars, like a big amalgam of a lot of the fantasy movies of the day. Everything from a little bit of the Sinbad movies by Harryhausen right up to Battlestar Galactica and things like that. Spacemen, monsters, wizards, the whole thing.
At the time that I wrote the pilot script, I believe we knew that the show was going forward. I think we knew it was a Go production, and we would have started to schedule how we were going to produce our scripts in a fashion that would allow us to produce 65 episodes in one season, which hadn't been done up until then. And I think the plan was to use a lot of freelance writers. We had a staff, and we did indeed expand the staff as we started He-Man and hired other writers who were not there at the beginning. So it was a combination of using staff writers and a lot of freelance writers. I think He-Man probably used more freelance writers than any previous Filmation show, certainly more so than any of the shows that I'd been involved with previously.
I first learned about He-Man when Arthur Nadell called me in to talk about it. He was going to be the producer and the story editor, and he said, we have a new show coming up. It's something that really hasn't been done before. Are you interested in writing episodes about? I said, what, they're just going to be like, what, long commercials? No, we'll have real stories.
Frankly, from a little girl on, I always loved superheroes. You know, Superman was my hero. And the next thing I knew, I was in a meeting. And there were about 10 of us around a table, and they were explaining what the concept was. I was the only woman in the room, and I understand I was the only woman writing these at all. But that was not an unusual situation back then. That was really how it went. And I enjoyed action adventures.
I remember hearing that Filmation was working on this project with Mattel Toys, and that is based on some toy characters, some action figures they had. When I heard about it, I went looking, found DC comic adaptation or early story, I think a couple of issues. Saw what the characters looked like. I looked in the toy store, saw what the characters looked like, and said, oh, this could be interesting. This could be really fun. The thing that was really exciting to me was that we were creating something absolutely new and different, and in a format that was new and different.
One of the main things we were faced with in this project, once I had agreed to stay there to get the series rolling, was building the stock library that we had had before in our history. In order to do that, we had been over to Mattel, and they had introduced us to some typical models in makeup that they were going to tour around the country to promote the toys. And of course we couldn't use those. I went with an assistant from one gymnasium to another trying to find bodybuilders, both male and female, that would sort of fit the bill of He-Man. And we interviewed them, we tested them for agility, for jumping and rolling and twisting so that they weren't just totally muscle bound. and we shot an extensive library. We did a storyboard on it first of the shots that we wanted, and we filmed this library about each character. And from there, we went ahead and had our layout artists and character design artists follow Mattel's designs. And then we started introducing the action, the talking pieces, and with He-Man there was a lot more action because of the situation, his character. That took a while, and we only had a few artists, as I said before, that were capable of drawing those figures. But once it was completed, it was a tremendous asset.
I was calling every studio in town, and I wanted to get onto a series, and the He-Man series was gearing up. They needed a lot of people. I just called up, and they said, "Come on down, take a test," and that's how my He-Man story began.
Keep your fangs to yourself, Beastman.
My feeling about the show was that it was great because there were 65 episodes, which meant we'd be working for probably a year. And I remember that being the promise at the beginning was, well, you're going to get a year's worth of work out of this. So, so I was very happy about that. And then it was kind of fun to see, that we were going to be doing, an action-adventure show. I thought that was kind of cool, and sort of drawing these comic book-looking characters, belting it out and doing cool, super things.
The development of characters, stories, and the animation process itself will be explored in future documentaries. But as faithful fans know, after its September 1983 debut, He-Man became one of television's most popular animated series ever.
We did the shows, and they were syndicated, and the shows went through the roof. The networks then really got mad at me because I almost blew ABC out of the water for Saturday morning because we did so well that they didn't do it, and we started running some of the shows on Saturday morning. They got ticked at me. Now the networks wouldn't talk to me anymore.
I don't think any of us had any idea at all how huge this was going to be. I mean, maybe Lou did, but I don't know how we could have. It hadn't been done before. There had never been a show where the toys and the show came out simultaneously. There'd never been a show where there'd been 65 episodes done at once and where they were going to be broadcast daily. There had never been a huge, sort of culturally transcendent phenomenon such as He-Man. So I think this took us all by complete surprise.
You know, the legacy that Filmation has to me, and it's really strange, and I didn't really discover this. Now, mind you, I'm 73 years old, and we were on a cruise, and for some reason, on the cruise, we had a butler, So the butler says to me, and I said, my husband did Fat Albert. Oh, the guy was a black kid. And I said, my husband did Fat Albert. Oh, he did Fat Albert. This butler told all the other butlers and all of a sudden, we were celebrities on that cruise.
It was not a celebrity cruise, though.
No, it wasn't. And I said to Lou, all these years, I let all these years go by. Well, I could have been a contender. And you know what? Now I stop people in the street.
Yeah, sure. He did He-Man. Oh, yeah, he did He-Man.
Yeah.
She realized the power of knowing that there are people out there who saw these things and appreciated them, whose lives had been somehow changed by them. And we used to, to me, the real satisfaction is knowing that the people who worked with us and the people who saw the shows both were better off, hopefully, as a result of having existed. That we were around.
You're just one of the better guys, honey. I'm not as altruistic as he is. I like the purse. Good night, Jay. Good night, Jay.